Hello and welcome to the 28th edition of Half Hour, a podcast starring me, John Paul Legitimacy, as your host. In today's episode, I will discuss public transport with Tristan Talosi. Thank you for coming on the show, dude. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, anytime. So just like to quickly start off, like if you want to tell us a little about yourself, like where you're from, like what you're doing here in Prague, like what's that all about?
Yeah, of course. So as I said, my name is Tristan Talosi. I am from the United States. To be more specific, I am from Arizona, sometimes known as the Desert State. I am now here in Prague for a study abroad year. I'm about halfway through. I've got another semester, and then I go back home. But I'm a third-year finance major, so like I said, I was talking about public transit, which isn't really my field of study, but it's something I'm really interested about. And since coming here, I feel like there's so much public transit here compared to the U.S., where we have so little, and kind of the issues around that are very interesting to me.
Yeah, and I'm an international relations major as well. I'm just saying it for the audience, but I would say that neither of us are technically experts in this field. But I will say that after spending some time here, you do realize a little bit about how their system operates with the transit, and how, I feel like it's only natural to look at our cities in America and kind of be like, where could this work? Where couldn't it work? How could it work? And I feel like a lot of the times this conversation is kind of put aside because, we're a car culture, and I understand that. But at the same time, it's like diversifying your transportation methods might bring some unforeseen benefits.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely very well put. How you said it's kind of put on the back burner a lot because there's oftentimes in politics and in the world there's other issues that are more pressing at hand. When this is something that I feel like in America should be concerned because it ties into a lot of other things, but we just don't really talk about it that much.
Yeah, I could say I miss driving my car. Sure, I do miss that. But
yeah, me too.
at the same time, it's like the cars work very well in America everywhere, but I think that the transport you see here would work better for some people in very specific cases. So a lot of the people you see riding the Prague transport, I think, are either students or people that live here but don't use their car to go around the city, or they don't have one, and they kind of live in the city. And there's a lot of people in America that I know that A, live in the city, and B, don't necessarily leave, and C, wouldn't mind not having a car, if that makes sense. That's a double negative.
Oh, for certain. And I think kind of the mentality here is people that do own cars in the city will use them to go between cities or across the country or out of the country. Whereas in America, oftentimes we use our cars to commute every day within the city. There's not much parking here in Prague, really. I mean, if you look around, if you look in the Old Town Square, there's no parking garages. There's some underground spots, but they're very few and far between. So you are kind of forced. Europe more incentivizes the use of public transportation to use that daily commute back and forth from work. Whereas in America, we build massive 3-lane, 6-lane freeways right in the middle of our cities.
Yeah. And I was reading about how Philadelphia is like half parking lot.
Yeah.
Like it's like half like the entire city. Half of it is a parking lot.
Yeah, if you look at like old pictures of Houston from like the 70s, and they've made it better since, but it's like there's like high rises, and then in between each high rise is like a massive parking lot, and like it looks like over half the city is just purely parking.
Yeah, it makes you wonder like why. Well, I understand the car lobby has had a lot of power in the U.S., but I still see it as a matter of like maybe not just pride, but for example, right? I'm from Boston. He's from Arizona. Where Boston is, all the way down to D.C., 1/4 of the American population lives in this so-called like mega city or mega area. Megalopolis, I think, is a word they use. But this would be an excellent location to build some high-speed rail between these cities here. Because of just the sheer multitude of people, the amount of people who are traveling to New York, D.C., Philadelphia. It could be larger. It's probably large now. But I feel like, we're the United States of America. We have the capability to build this thing. We should probably consult foreign experts. I mean, the Japanese are very, very well endowed in the high-speed rail community. I would say Prague is much more like like normal, like just like normal speed, like
Yeah.
average speed.
Yeah, there's not high-speed rail in Czech Republic,
Yeah.
but there is actually something that does exist. I kind of researched this because we talked about this on a previous occasion. It's called the Acela line. It's by Amtrak,
Yep.
and it goes
Yep.
kind of from Boston down to D.C. and connects all of like those major Northeast hubs like Philadelphia, New York, Boston, D.C. But I think part of the reason people don't use it in America is because we're so incentivized to use vehicles. And if you have a vehicle, which you probably already do, why would you take the train if you have a car? Right?
Yeah.
Because the car, I think part of the idea with the American is that the car is kind of like the ultimate freedom. And that with the car, you have the right to decide where you want to go and when you want to go. Where the train, you have to go where the train goes with the schedule. Here, there's a lot of people are de-incentivized to buy cars. It's more expensive. There's lots of tolls on the roads. Gas is more expensive. Insurance
Yeah.
is very expensive.
Yeah.
And through that de-incentivization, they have less cars out on the road.
Just
people
less
are using.
reasons to buy.
There's less reasons and more reasons to use the public transit. Because there's actually like an environmental way you can take this too. I mean, I looked it up because of all the carbon emissions each country creates. And in the U.S., the carbon emission per capita was 14.67 metric tons per person, whereas in the EU it was only 6.98 metric tons per person.
So they use less carbon.
Yeah, so they use, on a per capita basis, almost less than half that of the U.S. citizen, and you can kind of think, well, why would that be? You can maybe point a finger to maybe the U.S. has more, emission-producing factories, but I think a lot of that comes down to the vehicle ownership rate.
Yeah.
And if everyone's out in their cars, our cars are producing a lot of CO2 emission, whereas, when one bus is producing more than a car, but a lot, like a bus full of people is going to produce a lot less than everybody else in their vehicle.
Yeah, and like I know that there's a lot of people I know that are very concerned about the environment. Some more than others, obviously. Like it's just I know people in America that are very coming from a blue state. It can be a lot of people are talking about it, and yet there's no discussion about how we can mitigate our own individual consumption. Again, like I love that our country is a car culture. Like I do like that. But that does not mean it has to be so one-sided. Like I feel like there should be a discussion about utilizing these other forms of transportation. But then another issue is you get to these cities, right? You get to like Philadelphia, you get to Washington, you get to New York, Boston. The public transport in the cities are not that good either. So it's like you get to the middle of the city and then you're like, then what? Like imagine if this, I don't know where the Acela line drops you off, but that's a whole nother discussion. I was going to say like,
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
I know that this rail takes about 7 hours to get to DC,
From
which
Boston.
and it's the exact same time to drive, and the tickets for the train are ridiculously expensive, like round trip.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. We don't de-incentivize driving, so we continue to drive.
I think one key element is that Amtrak is run as a for-profit corporation under the government, obviously.
And it's pretty much the only rail company within the entire country
Yeah.
that is passenger, not rail company. There's lots of cargo ones, but
Yeah, of course. We actually have the most extensive cargo network, I think, in the world, or one of those.
really, I didn't know that.
Yeah, we have one of the. I think so. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure we have one of the most extensive cargo rail networks, but we don't have any passenger rail. And I get it, because the U.S., like the geography is much different than Europe. Europe is a peninsula of peninsulas. Like you have like Italy, you have like Spain, you
Yes,
got like
that's true.
Denmark and the Balkans and like, the U.K., and that's an island obviously, but like Scandinavia, right? So I get it, like how the rail can like infiltrate into these areas. The U.S. is vast and expansive, so a rail from like New York to Chicago would make less sense than having like an air transit system. But a rail from Boston to DC, or like maybe a few cities on either side, that makes, to me, it makes more sense because you actually have the population density necessary for this to work. But running it as a for-profit corporation is going to drive the prices up, and you're not going to actually incentivize people to go forth and use the train. So
Yes, exactly.
part of me feels like it is in America we have a discussion about what the government's role is in terms of spending. I would love to see the government take some money that they're using from us, the taxpayer, and put it towards things that we can tangibly see. Every year we have a new budget that gets passed, and we're sending money to different countries around the world, and it's like we should really start to think about it investing in these new projects in America. Mega projects are not the worst idea. They employ people. They get society kind of churning. They get people thinking about new things, and it would show the American people that we have the initiative to really make a change. And
Oh, for sure.
and maybe not everyone has to use it, but I'm just trying to think about how we can diversify our transport network, because the traffic that you experience in these cities is ridiculous.
And the West Coast has, I feel like, a bigger hurdles to overcome in a lot of ways than the East Coast. And being that the West Coast, I'll tell you, for instance, the city I'm from is called Prescott, Arizona. And it's Prescott, there's another city called Prescott Valley, but there's a few cities that kind of conglomerate to make this area that has, in the ballpark, about 120,000 people. There is not a single mode of public transportation. There's not even a city bus. And it's very spread out. I actually looked at it, and it's something like about the size of Prague. Like, that whole area is about the size of Prague. It's very spread out. So you can imagine if you're a person, and it's absolutely necessary for you to have a vehicle. You can't do anything. You can't get to work. You can't, go to the store without having a car. So I think, while the rail network is important between the country, I feel like what we need to establish first is reliable public transportation within each city, so that people can use these systems like they do here in Prague to get between, just to get between work and home, go to the store and home. Because you notice even here in Prague, people that have cars, like I said, will drive to the other cities, but they won't drive their car from their home, out in Prague 10 to their work in Prague 1. They'll use the metro. That's what we should need incentivizing in these U.S. cities, is using this kind of transportation to get to and from work, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I was thinking about how in the early 1900s, you actually had the U.S. and Europe on a similar track with public transport. Like,
yes,
there were a lot of trams in New
very
York
interesting.
and Boston, but they all kind of got sidelined and taken away. But I really think about how here, there's something very elegant about a tram as opposed to a bus. So
Yes.
the tram is literally on rails, figuratively and literally, but it's very reliable. I've never had an issue with the trams here.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never waited more than like 2 or 3 minutes than what it said on the board. There's actually these these boards that describe to you when it's coming, what day and like what time that would be. So if you're standing there on like a Friday at 2 p.m., you'll know it's coming at 2:03 based on the numbers that are on the sheet. And I'm sure we have that in the U.S., but I think our transportation system is infamous for being unreliable and not well developed. And there's a big there's not a big care for it either. Like, it's not like something important.
And I think that kind of just comes down to the funding of it. I think it's way better funded here, and when you have something that's put more attention to and better funded, and people actually really do rely on it, which they do in the U.S. too, but more so here. They're going to make sure it's on time. They're going to make sure it's something that's very usable and very easy to use for people. And there's kind of a lot of I know buses in the U.S., especially if you think of a Greyhound bus, there's kind of this negative mentality around it.
Oh, of course.
Of sort of oh, you're taking the bus, why would you do that? But that's kind of a question of how do you remove that mentality around public transportation. That's something that will just have to take time, but we have to sort of rebrand it maybe in a way that it hasn't been presented previously.
And just speaking from personal experience, I've done a few hikes up in the northern Czech Republic. They call it the Krkonoš mountain range. I never say it correctly. I get yelled at, but I was able to take a bus from Prague to the village where the mountain is, and then we climbed up the mountain, went back down, took a bus back to the edge of the metro line, and then took the metro back to our stop. We had to change over, but my point here is that I did this for less than $10.
Yeah. It's very inexpensive.
Even in the U.S., the gas alone for me to drive the same distance and drive back is way more expensive than $10.
It's way more efficient to take these kind of systems.
Right.
And I have a number, actually, which is a really astounding number that I looked up. And on average, to own a vehicle in the U.S., it costs someone $10,728 a year.
Okay.
That's the average, I was kind of blown away by that figure at first. I checked a few other sources, and all of the numbers were concurrent with this. And obviously, you can own a car for much less than that. You can buy a very old used vehicle, but when you think about it, this number isn't really that unrealistic. People are buying $60,000 vehicles. They have leases, they have insurance, they have gas, they have. You can get an accident, you have to pay for that. There's all sorts of things that come with owning a vehicle. And part of that's the beauty of Europe is you don't have to own a vehicle, which can really, take a financial burden off people.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like I said, in my town, there's nothing. You have to have a car, so it makes it much harder to be poor in that sense, because you have to take on that financial burden of owning a vehicle.
Like I was gonna say, right? I have a transport pass in Prague, a student pass. I paid $60 for that.
Yeah, and I was looking at like the annual pass, and it was like 3,600 crowns, which is like 140 bucks.
Yeah, that's that. Yeah,
and that's all your transportation needs within the city. And if you figure a few times a year you have to leave the city.
Buses,
trams, metro, even the funicular that goes up the hill.
Oh, I didn't know that actually.
Yeah, you can go on that too. So, if you consider that cost versus the probably thousands of dollars you're going to be pouring into a vehicle every year.
Yeah,
that's substantial.
And again, like this idea that I feel like we're talking about is about there is a group of people in the United States that fit into the category I'm going to describe. Mm-hmm. They have a car. They don't necessarily feel so strongly about not having it if there was suitable public transport.
Yes.
And I feel like cities are not built for cars. Like I feel like this is a huge issue that I have with American cities. There's also the fact that we don't have a lot of squares. Like there's not a lot of squares in American cities. Like how in Europe you have Old Town Square.
Where you are in Boston, I know that's not true. And where I live, there is squares, but they're not. I'll explain it later, but they're not really like laid out for this, what you're talking about.
Like I'm saying, like in all these big cities, like okay, we have Times Square. Mm-hmm. But it's like the only one. Like it's like there's not these big places where people can congregate. But anyway,
I know what you're talking about by square, not like a physical square, but like a
like a piazza.
Yes,
like
yes, I know what you're talking about.
But like our cities should not be kind of places where cars dominate. Like no one wants to walk on the sidewalk and have these cars rushing by.
No,
like I think it's. I mean, some people would be like, oh, like come on, like grow up a little bit, like so what? But it's kind of like it ruins the vibe. Like I walk here and I don't feel this way at all. I mean, I'm sure you have to cross the street a few times and there's cars, but it's not like in the U.S.
It's mainly like low speed roads. We have these things called like stroads. You know when you go to many U.S. towns and it's like everything looks the same. You pull off the freeway exit and you have a road. It's like 2 or 3 lanes in each side going either way. The speed limit's 40, 45 miles an hour. Mm-hmm. There's fast food, there's hotels. And that's what that's the kind of the brand of most U.S. cities when you walk into them or when you drive into them off the exit.
Yeah.
Is this high speed road, and then you're right, we build big freeways that cut our neighborhoods in half, and a lot of these freeways create these little like cinching boxes around like downtown areas. There's tons of cities like this.
There's like wasted space kind
of. I mean there's St. Louis, Missouri is like a perfect example of this. Kansas City, there's just like these boxes around them. That kind of isolate cities, because when you have a freeway, you can't walk between neighborhoods now.
Yeah, no,
it creates this large barrier.
I don't know. I feel like the purpose of a city is for people to congregate, and part of me feels like, this is me just thinking abstractly, but imagine we have these parking lots at the end of the metro lines that exist already in some of these cities. You could then incentivize people to move through these cities, and like in Boston, we have one tram, and it goes into the South Shore. I've never ridden it. I have to say here, the metro line is absolutely impeccable. I've only had like 1 or 2 issues with it in my time being here.
Yeah.
The Soviets built this thing in the 1970s, so They actually built it very well. This is something that was built well, I would say.
That was something the Soviets did well.
Most communism things are not good, obviously, but
this was
good.
Yeah.
The way it runs, the way it's interconnected through the city, it really kind of spread through the city very well. One thing I want to bring up is I saw on a Rogan podcast, actually. It's funny how I'm referencing, by the way, like a Rogan podcast, like on my podcast.
Yeah.
It's kind of
funny. Is the podcast. So.
Yeah, like he's like the epicenter.
Yeah.
But anyway, there was a man on there who was discussing how in Japan, they put a map of Tokyo, small scale, right? 3D though. Like the streets were there and like the buildings. You didn't necessarily need like the buildings to be buildings. You just needed the streets. They actually put the map there, and then they had this mycelium or this fungus or this mushroom or something like this. organism that it was able to find the most efficient route through the city that
Wow.
they wanted basically to find out how they could build the Japanese metro and transit system best. And they basically put this map in in a box, and then they had this organism that was able, they put nutrients in there and whatever, right, for it to grow. But it found the most efficient route, not only to like point A to point B, but all inclusive, like through the city, like how it can be most efficiently set up, almost like a web, like a spider
Yeah.
web.
It's
So
very interesting.
yeah, like that's
Fascinating.
it's not a bad idea at all. I feel like
No.
that's pretty interesting. And I mean, with grid cities like New York, I feel like that's like
It could work.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
that could work easily. You know.
Yeah, the part of I said earlier the West Coast has maybe more hurdles than the East Coast does in this terms of public transportation. And I say that because the West Coast is so spread out.
Yeah.
Where I live, Phoenix, Arizona. I don't live in Phoenix, Arizona. I live in a different city in Arizona, but Phoenix is a prime example of this because everyone that's moving to Phoenix right now is wealthy, older, retired people.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a wealthy, old, retired person, you want to live in your own freestanding house. You generally might want a gated community. You might want a little bit of land to go with that.
Some separation.
Yeah, you're going to want, so that's what makes this, they call this urban sprawl, right? You have the epicenter, which is a few skyscrapers, apartment complexes, and then you have this sprawl of just, one or two story homes that make up the entire city. It makes for these massive areas of just of population, and that's what makes public transit so difficult. Prague is a very condensed city.
Yeah.
It makes it
Yeah.
easy to use public transportation. When you have something like Phoenix, the Phoenix metro area, establishing transit in an area where you could have one stop servicing this massive area. I mean, it would have to be so extensive and so large because even though you could have stops in these areas, people would still have to walk unreasonable amounts of time. And that's so hard to reverse. To go back and say how do you condense a city that's already sprawled like that? I don't know the answer to that question. That's a very difficult thing to bring up. LA is the same way. Las Vegas is the same way. Denver is the same
huge.
way. Yeah, and
LA is
all of
huge.
these cities are going to have, if we want to establish reliable and usable public transportation, are going to have to come up with a way to figure this out. LA has they're introducing a rail system. They've had a rail system for a while.
Yeah.
They're expanding it. And they're creating stops in these cities that are far outside of the city. But there's just one stop for a city of 50,000 people.
Yeah.
You can imagine that's
and
convenient for people that live around it. But
nobody wants to play it by the clock. And I will say, like here, for example, right? Like, we were talking about how in America the car is the ultimate freedom, and the scheduling in Europe is a little different.
Yeah.
But I really feel like, if I'm out late somewhere, right? Like it's like 1 or 2 a.m. They have these night trams. Even then, you're not waiting too long. Like you could just go to the stop and be like, oh, like I need to. My work is across the city, right? Let's say that I have to get there. It takes me 30 minutes to get there. Sure, okay. I walk to the metro. I go down, take the metro, go back up, go to work. I can also take the tram there, but I never feel like I have to be like exactly on it because there'll always be another tram coming in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
But the issue is like every state, I think, they have a capital, obviously, or they have their most populated city, and especially in these, in the smaller states. I don't think Arizona is smaller than my state, though. I mean,
population-wise?
yeah, I think it's bigger.
I don't think it is. I think it's bigger.
Yeah. But like for
Your state is
example,
much more
like
dense. Your state is much more dense than
yeah.
mine.
Like actually, public transport in my state might actually work very well because it like you have Boston as kind of like the metropole, like the center, and then you have all these neighborhoods around it, one of
Yes.
which I'm from, and they're all around it, and you have like 95 that makes like a little C shape around it, but we actually have a Massachusetts transit system on rail. It's just not. You have to park at the place, and then they upcharge you for the parking. So it disincentivizes you just to like why shouldn't I just drive into Boston, right? I drive to the Salem stop. I pay exorbitant amounts of money to park my car there for the day, and then I go back and then I drive back to my house with the car. But it's like I would love it if the parking was either very cheap or even free, so that you could take your car, you park it there. It's for a goal. It's not for making money. I think that's where our transit system goes awry because we see it as like, oh, it has to be profitable. Whereas here, it's very much like, okay, they might be running it at a deficit, but you're actually providing a public good that makes these cities much more attractive. There's a reason why people come here, and this city gets voted the most beautiful in the world, like years over years on end.
Yeah.
And I really do believe it's because, partially, the transit system here is just so well tailored to the actual city's needs. Like, and we have a lot to learn. I think we have a lot to learn from a city like Prague. I know we're a different country, and I'm not going to lie, I think suburban life in Czech Republic is not really as nice as in America, in my view. But the city life in this city, I think, well blows away many of the cities in America, because it's just, you're very able to be somebody without any of the things you typically need, like a car. Like, again, like we're both studying here. I don't think either of us plan to buy a car here, but it's like
it wouldn't be practical at all.
Not at all, yeah. And it's like I could picture a European person going to one of our cities and being like, "Man, like I wish I had a car."
Yeah.
And then there's also parallel parking, and people are like, "Oh, I hate parking in the city." And it's like we complain about these problems without providing a reason to fix it.
That's a very good point you say. It's like we should see it more as a public service that's put on by the government, rather than it'd be like saying, "Oh, do our roads turn a profit?" Of course, roads don't turn a profit. They're a public service. Public transit should be viewed as in the same eyes, in my opinion. It's a way of, it's a means of getting around, and it's like, why would you build a park? A park's not profitable. But it makes it benefits the community.
And the legacy of socialism here in Czech Republic, you know, I've seen it a little bit. I think that this country is one of the it's going to be a very important country in Europe in terms of growth and in terms of the former Soviet countries, our former satellite states rather. I think that this is going to be the most successful of all of those countries, you know, other than like, so you have the USSR, and then you have like Poland and Czech Republic and Slovakia and Hungary, like all these countries. I think Czech Republic is going to be the most successful one because they're embracing a very capitalist viewpoint, while at the same time holding on to the historical piece that, you know, in the past it was a lot of socialism, a lot of government control, but they have this transport network that they inherited from their past, and it runs very well, and they're keeping it very well like moving, you know, and it's something that's provided by the government. And I think a lot of Americans would kind of say like, oh, like we shouldn't let the government do this, it should be private companies. But my viewpoint to that is like, it really works so well here, and it's not run as a for-profit. It's run for the people of the city, and I think that there's also a mindset of the people in charge that they want to provide the people of Prague with these things. Like it's not always about profit and greediness in this way.
You can see that a lot in the way the city is built. I mean, there's lots of parks and green spaces as well. You know, we don't have this kind. We have parks, obviously, but not as many as there are here. Because everyone lives in apartments here, pretty much. There's very, very few freestanding houses. So when everyone's, you know, if you don't have a backyard, you're going to want to have a green space to go and enjoy. You know, and that's very different from the U.S. But you know, it still kind of applies. It's the government beautifying the city and making it a nice place for everybody to live, and it's not for profit. It's for the good of the city and the good of the people.
I wrote a lot about in one of my previous semesters about how green spaces are very like important in cities. Like you need that because people need to kind of like decompress a little bit. If like they say going for a walk is good for your mental health, but I can't picture being in one of these large cities and going for a walk and feeling calmer. You know, like I don't know. There's not a lot of not only green spaces, but they're very crowded. Yeah, it's tough. Like sometimes I feel like our cities in America were built for the cars and the people commuting in. And that I feel like is kind of changing. Like the nation's changing. Like we're having so many immigrants coming into these cities, and you know my father made a very good point actually one time. He was like regarding this topic, he was like, the car is also a status symbol.
It is.
So people just want it. Like it's like a very American like thing in this way where it's like, oh, it's a symbol of wealth, it's a symbol of excellence, whatever. But I still think that most people would want to own a car, but you're kind of taking pressure off of that portion of the city's infrastructure. Like the idea is you want to take pressure off where you can, you know, and maybe, who knows, like imagine you have like you take a city that would be a great example to build these transit systems. You build it, and then you have like a car buyback program. Maybe you tell people like, if you're interested, you could sell your car at this premium, and you can get like an advance on your transport costs, or like you get this money back in taxes or something. Like who knows, but or you find a way to make it so that these people can like kind of transition into not having a car. But it's only if they want to. It's about a freedom thing.
And they of course have to establish something better than we currently have
of course,
to start doing those programs. In these cities, in these major U.S. cities that have just such a lack of any sort of public transportation at all.
Yeah, like the government would have to make the first move here. They would have to build it. They would have to build it
certainly.
up. Yeah,
certainly.
I don't know if you have any more points you want to add. We're getting to the end of the time.
Yeah, I think the only thing I have to say really to finish up with is like, this issue, like I said at the beginning, is kind of put on the back burner. It's not discussed much, but it does play into a lot of other things. Like I said, it plays into, excuse me, it can help with climate. It can help, in a way it can be seen as welfare, Why are people spending $10,000 plus a year on vehicles? That's a huge chunk of most people's incomes, for cars. Not everyone spends that. But it can tie into so many other aspects of our society. It can help beautify our cities, and I feel like it's something that we should be talking more about and be bringing up more in modern politics in America. That it's just and take it off the back burner, sort of.
Yeah, and I guess I would agree with you there. I think that as we move into the 21st century further, people have these grand visions of how cities will be green with the green plants on the roof and all of that, but what's missing is the need for a city to have a transport system like how ants move through an anthill.
That's very true. Yeah.
Like honestly, I feel like I'm part of a greater organism when I live here because I can it's like a blood vessel. Like you can easily get to different parts of the city, but in America, it's like you need a car. Like it's like you need your own vehicle to do so. And I think for most of the country, this is very important. You do need it. But there are just parts of this country where the benefits of a car are outweighed by the benefits of a resilient and well planned out and built public transport system. I think that's huge.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, guys, thank you for watching. I appreciate it. This has been the 28th episode. There should be a new episode coming out anytime soon, but just stay tuned and appreciate it. Thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, of course. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Bye, guys. Thanks.